Now we will talk about what do we want to look for in prospective students, and what kind of goals are there. So what to look for in a prospective student first depends upon the guide's position on the continuum, right? As we already saw that if you have a highly focused research agenda, then it is desirable to find a skilled student with motivation for that research area. So that is likely to lead to alignment and therefore success on the mutually agreed metrics. Okay, on the other hand, if you are looking at, if you are highly focused on the student's growth, then the problem that motivates the student becomes more important than the finding the skills of the student in the beginning. And if it's in the middle, so if you have a somewhat flexible research agenda and somewhat focused on the student's growth, then what you can do is find a student with reasonable motivation for your research agenda, and then within that research agenda find a problem that suits the student. So for some students it may be a well-defined problem, and for other students it may be a more open-ended problem. So if you have a highly flexible research agenda and are strongly focused on the student's growth, once again it can come back to the same thing, that find a student with reasonable motivation for this area. Now if you are strongly focused on the student's growth, it may be more desirable to give a more open-ended problem rather than a very well-defined problem. Okay, so now this is a view which we will not be going into, but it is part of the slides for later reference. So we have the two axes of being focused on one's own research agenda and being focused on the student's growth. And if you look at it, you can actually find the type of students that would suit different quadrants in this matrix. Okay. So on the x-axis again you have high, medium, low, and on the y-axis also you have high, medium, low, and depending upon where your position is, it's possible to find a student, or it's possible to align with a student who will work well and lead to success in that situation. So I will not be discussing this matrix in this workshop, but it is part of the slides and you are welcome to look at it later and maybe discuss it as part of the assignment. Okay. Now coming to an example. So what is it that I look for in a PhD student? So in my case, in addition to the department admission criteria, I look for passion to solve some educational problem. I look for energy to learn the skills required to approach the problem, and enthusiasm for multiple activities. Why do I do this? This is because I have a highly flexible research agenda and I enjoy working with such students. Okay. So in the process I also learn new topics, new skills, and in general it gives me satisfaction to work with such students. So here are some examples. So when we talk about what does passion to solve an educational problem mean? Okay. So one student was highly interested in teaching vernacular medium students. Another PhD student was interested in setting up a teacher training program in his own country. Okay. When it comes to energy to learn the skills and tools, one student wanted to learn an animation tool, others went into analytics, and many others learnt about qualitative methods and so on. Similarly, when we talk about enthusiasm for multiple activities, many students have volunteered at NGOs, they write blogs, or they conduct faculty development programs and so on. So these are just some examples. The point here is all my students have all these three aspects. So in that sense I am lucky to have got students who satisfy my criteria for engaging with them as students. Okay. So now let's talk about what would you look for in a PhD student. So once again, this is a 5-minute activity. So write down some points for what skills, abilities and characteristics that you would look for in a potential PhD student. And then examine if these are aligned with your position, right? So that is the key thing, that your student and you have to be aligned on the continuum. So once again, it is recommended that you use the class responses document so that there can be peer learning. You can look at each other's answers and revise your answer before you submit it at the end of the day. Okay, I see that very few people are writing in the class responses document, while the number of people in the room has not reduced. So I hope others are writing in their own notes. Okay, so moving on from this point. So now that you have written down some points for what skills, abilities that you would look for in a student, right? So let's see, can you find this student? Okay, the ideal student for you. Okay, it's unlikely that you will find an ideal fit with any student. So the purpose of this activity is not to evaluate any student against your ideal. The purpose of this activity is for you to get clarity on your expectations. So now that you have written a whole lot of expectations for your student, you need to reflect on which of these are reasonable and which of these can you let go of. So here again, it's important to remember that you were also a PhD student at one point. Okay. Would you have found these reasonable when you were a student? So that is one criteria by which you can judge whether you are making reasonable demands on your students or not. Again, there is the question of which of these are easy for the student who is currently in front of you and which of them are challenging. What can you let go of? What must you insist on? Which of your desirable fit with a student are aligned with the student's own goals? Okay. So once you have a clarity of these points, then as a guide, you think about what learning experiences should you now design for the student in front of you. And this exercise has to be carried out each time you get a new student. Okay. So now if we look at, now that you've got a student, what are the goals for that student? Okay, what should the student achieve in their time that they spend with you? So there may be various answers here, such as the student should gain technical expertise and skills, they should have research publications and recognition, they should have improved clarity of thought, they should become a better teacher, right? And a whole vast array of answers may be there, which are the goals for a PhD student to achieve before they graduate. Okay. So now the answers once again are not fixed in terms of your answer or the student's answer. Okay. So you may have one position on the continuum, you may have certain expectations, then the student may have different answers based on their expectations. So what is important here is to arrive at a combined or mutually agreed set of goals for the student. Okay, what will you not compromise on? What will the student not compromise on? These are important questions to consider. So for example, what are my goals for a PhD student? Okay, in my case, the student should learn to think deeply and clearly. So this is achieved by working on open-ended problems and grappling with the problem for a long time. The student should be able to anticipate details and complexity. Okay, so now this should happen even when thinking about a topic at a high level. For example, when you go and listen to a talk in a different discipline or slightly different area, you should be able to anticipate the complexity of the work that the other person is presenting. Okay, so even in areas that one is not an expert in. So for me, this is an important goal. Then the student should pick up new skills and tools. So these skills may be analysis skills or synthesis skills, but whatever be the number of tools the student has at the time of coming in, they should have gained some new skills and tools by the time they leave the PhD. Okay. And the student should also contribute to research in the area in terms of publications and other visible activities. Okay. So for me, this translates to specific goals for each student depending upon the area, topic and their interests. So when do I say that my goals are met? This is basically to know that, okay, when have we achieved what we set out to do? Okay. So for me, this is when the student no longer needs help to identify and solve research problems. Okay. When they are able to do this on their own without any scaffolding. The student has picked up some new research skills and is proficient in them, can write a paper independently, and can contribute to discussions on other students' research. So like I said, being able to think about a different area, even though you have little exposure to that, is an important criteria for me. So my goal, one way of identifying whether that goal is met or not, is when a student can contribute to discussions on other students' research. Okay. And finally, it is when I don't fully understand the details of the student's work anymore, but I see evidence of rigor and careful thought in it. Okay, so this is when I say that the student is now ready to graduate. And for me, this is a matter of pride that my student has actually gone ahead further than me in that particular area. Okay, so now coming to what would be your goals for a PhD student. Same exercise we have to do. Write down some points of what goals would you have. Now that you have identified what would be your ideal student, write down what goals would you have for your potential PhD student, and then examine whether these are aligned with your position. So once again, we can take 5 minutes to do this activity.